Hi. So I'm writing this after recording the video just to explain what an ordeal I turned the recording process into. But between 4 different very cheap mics and multiple recording sessions, I cobbled together a mishmash of all the takes and a few different levels of hydration, which is my fault, into an hour of me sharing a brief history of strange things in the sky. I sound crazy, but let's talk about exotic aerial phenomena.
I've noticed something strange. The higher you go, in academia, in politics, in finance, in military ranks, even in spiritual circles, the more open people seem to be to what the rest of the world still calls fringe. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but from personal experience, as a kind of quiet 6-foot-tall fly on the wall, I've seen it again and again, among every twisted version of high society, among the people who deal in certainty, who hold influence, who are surrounded by advisors. There's an undercurrent of curiosity about the unknown. Not just curiosity, but investment. I've met hedge fund managers and high-level consultants who are paid to work in think tanks on the subject. I've known people who have personally made sure that scientists, military officials, tech moguls, and senators are privately briefed on matters that a few years ago would have gotten you laughed out of the room. And at some point you start to wonder, why? Why is it that those with access to the most information, those who can ask any question and get an answer, keep circling back to this, to the skies, to the oceans, to the unexplained, to the possibility that there's something out there we don't understand? Today isn't about aliens per se. It's about the phenomenon, what we've seen, recorded, documented, and debated since the beginning of time. A chronological tour through humanity's encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena. Don't consider this video complete, or the body of information I'm presenting you to be absolute. I just think if I provide enough data, you'll be able to figure out the same things I have. There are details left out of cases that I'm aware of and excited to include the next time I speak on this subject. It's incredibly long, and at times I myself sound like I'm going to fall asleep, but I know I have to do this for us. We're going to start at the very beginning and follow the trail through ancient sightings, wartime encounters, military investigations, modern whistleblowers, and high-level government briefings, all the way to today's congressional hearings and scientific panels. This story isn't about belief, it's about history. Before we launch fully into the timeline, I want to pause and offer something broader, a perspective that threads through every chapter of this story. The idea of aerial anomalies, things in the sky that don't belong there, is not new. In fact, it's so old that it has been immortalized in myth, scripture, and spiritual traditions from nearly every corner of the world. In ancient Sumerian texts, we find tales of the Anunnaki descending from the heavens. The Vedic scriptures of India speak of Vimanas, flying chariots used by gods and demons alike. In the Bible, Ezekiel describes a wheel within a wheel, descending from the sky, accompanied by beings not quite human. Islamic traditions include descriptions of luminous beings and celestial vehicles. In Mesoamerican civilizations, feathered serpents like Quetzalcoatl descended from above with divine instruction. Art throughout the ages reflects the same preoccupation. Medieval Christian paintings occasionally depict strange flying discs in the background, complete with beams of light. Buddhist mandalas and cave carvings hint at aerial mobility beyond the earthly realm. Even Aboriginal Dreamtime stories mention beings that arrived from the stars and taught sacred knowledge. And across all of this, there's something consistent. not necessarily in the shapes or names, but in the idea that these visitations are both physical and spiritual. They come with light, they come with awe, they come with knowledge or warnings. Sometimes they come with fear. Why mention all this? Because in 2025, when we hear government and military whistleblowers speak of encounters with non-human intelligence, we shouldn't be surprised. It's only in the last century that we've tried to reframe them under the sterile label of aerial phenomena. But they were always that, and more. What's most humbling is that, just like us, our ancestors recorded what they saw. Not always with the precision we demand today, but with just as much sincerity and urgency. The difference is that they used religious language. We use military and scientific jargon. But both are trying to describe the same thing. An uninvited mystery that shows up in the sky, behaves strangely, and then disappears. Maybe it's not that our technology has finally revealed a new truth. Maybe it's just caught up to an old one.
In antiquity and the Middle Ages, before the term UFO existed, people still recorded strange things in the sky. Many of these accounts are wrapped in the language of omens or religious signs, yet they sound eerily familiar to modern ears. For example, the ancient Roman historian Livy wrote that in 218 BC, a phantom navy was seen gleaming in the sky, essentially describing what looked like ships in the heavens. A few decades later, in 76 BC, Roman author Pliny the Elder recorded a spark falling from a star, growing larger to moon size, then shooting back up, changing into a torch-like shape. Such descriptions of fiery or metallic objects appearing, moving strangely and then vanishing, were passed down as prodigies or divine portents. Jumping forward to the medieval era, one of the most famous early reports comes from 1561 in Nuremberg, Germany, when residents witnessed what they described as an aerial battle. Contemporary broadsheets and a woodcut by Hans Glasser depict the sky filled with spheres, crosses, and cylinders of various colors, all starting to fight among themselves until some fell to the ground in a cloud of smoke. A black, spear-shaped object appeared afterwards, looming in the dawn sky. 5 years later, in 1566, citizens of Basel, Switzerland, also reported numerous spherical objects darting through the sky, as recorded in another broadsheet of the time. In a more bizarre report from 1665, fishermen in Stralsund, on the Baltic coast, claimed they saw an apparent aerial battle, followed by a flat, round form, like a plate hovering overhead. It's important to note that these pre-20th century sightings are sporadic and often poorly understood, not because people at the time weren't paying attention, but because of the nature of history and its keepers. People lacked any concept of aliens or extraterrestrial visitors when describing such events. They didn't jump to spacecraft explanations the way we might now. Some sightings could well have been comets, meteors, or atmospheric optics, later exaggerated by imagination. The rest, though, could fall into the same category that modern government and military officials classify anomalous encounters under: unknown. The fact that strange aerial sightings have been recorded across different cultures and eras sets the stage for our story. It shows that when the modern UFO era began, it didn't emerge from nowhere. Mysterious lights and objects in the sky already had deep historical precedent. As we entered the industrial age, reports of odd things in the sky began to take new forms. In the 1890s, years before the Wright brothers' first flight, a wave of mystery airship sightings swept across the United States, starting in 1896 in California and spreading to the Midwest
by 1897, newspapers carried stories of strange cigar-shaped airships with bright searchlights seen flying at night. Many were likely hoaxes or misidentified planets, but not all can be dismissed so easily. In one well-documented case in April 1897, dozens of witnesses in Nebraska, including a group of jurors and a judge, watched a huge airborne craft with lights and a propeller cruise overhead for about 30 minutes. This was an era of dirigibles and invention, and some thought a secret inventor might be testing an advanced airship. Yet the speeds and maneuvers described often exceeded what any airship of the day could do. The great airship mystery of 1896 to 97 has become a fascinating prelude to modern UFOs in retrospect, even featuring an early claim of a UFO crash.
When humanity took to the skies in the early 20th century, the UFOs, whatever they were, seemed to follow. During World War II, Allied airmen coined a term for the weird aerial phenomena, Foo Fighters. These were not rock musicians, but glowing orbs and lights that dogged Allied bomber crews on night missions. Starting in 1944, pilots in Europe and also in the Pacific Theater reported fast-moving, usually reddish or orange balls of light that would pace their aircraft. They'd appear suddenly, fly alongside a plane or in formation, and sometimes peel away with incredible speed. These objects did not show up on radar and did not attack, but they freaked out many experienced airmen. Some described seeing fiery orange lights zip around their planes, seeming under intelligent control. Others reported glowing red tubes that mirrored their maneuvers before streaking off. Suspecting some advanced German weapon, Allied intelligence investigated the Foo Fighters, but could never explain them. The phenomena were officially chalked up to combat fatigue or St. Elmo's fire, but those explanations never satisfied the pilots who witnessed these elusive bogies. Then in 1946, just after the war, a new surge of reports perplexed authorities in Europe, especially in Sweden. Hundreds of witnesses saw rocket-like objects streaking across the skies. These were dubbed the ghost rockets. Over 2,000 sightings were logged in Sweden and neighboring countries in 1946. These were often described as missile-shaped fireballs, sometimes with maneuvering capabilities. The immediate fear was that they might be Soviet test rockets or captured German V-2s being launched. Yet, no fragments were found, and the trajectories didn't match known rockets. Many ghost rockets made sharp turns or were reported to crash into lakes without a trace. Swedish military investigations, assisted by Britain and the US, could not conclusively identify the ghost rockets, though meteor showers were considered a partial explanation. Still, many reports did not coincide with meteor activity and suggested powered flight. The ghost rocket flap gradually subsided by year's end, but like the Foo Fighters, it primed the pump. People were looking at the skies with a new awareness that strange things were up there. Little did they know the biggest wave was yet to come. Most UFO historians mark June 24th, 1947 as the dawn of the modern UFO era. I'm not saying this is correct. On that day, a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state when he saw something utterly unexpected. 9 shiny objects in formation speeding past the mountain peaks. Arnold estimated their speed at over 1,000 miles per hour, far beyond any aircraft of the time, and described their motion as like a saucer skipping across water. Press reports sensationalized this description into flying saucers, and just like that, the pop culture term was born. The Arnold sighting made headlines nationwide and triggered a deluge of UFO reports in the summer of 1947.
all of a sudden, flying saucers were on the public's mind. Just 2 weeks later, the most infamous UFO legend of all time took root, the Roswell incident. In early July 1947, something crashed on a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico. The Army Air Force initially stated it had recovered a flying disc, only to retract the story and claim it was merely a weather balloon. Decades later, Roswell would be resurrected by investigators who believed it was an extraterrestrial craft. But in the context of 1947, Roswell actually came and went fairly quietly after the balloon explanation. It was Arnold's high-profile sighting and many similar ones in the late 1940s that had the U.S. military concerned. In September 1947, just after the Roswell incident, Air Force General Nathan Twining wrote a secret memorandum stating unequivocally, the phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. This wasn't a conspiracy theorist. It was the head of Air Materiel Command, who would later become chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Twining's detailed memo went on to describe common features of the flying discs being seen: silent operation, extreme maneuvers, incredible rates of climb, and flight characteristics beyond any known aircraft. He noted some objects showed evasive action when intercepted and appeared under intelligent control. In other words, as early as 1947, the U.S. Air Force privately concluded some UAP were real, physical craft under intelligent guidance, with capabilities far exceeding our own at the time. That assessment, not visionary or fictitious, was a direct response to the flood of credible sightings in the summer of 1947. And despite the public dismissal of flying saucers in subsequent years, Twining's position was never retracted internally. This shows that even before modern cases like Nimitz, a top general, with all the data at hand, felt some unidentified craft were likely craft of extraordinary origin. In 1948, the U.S. Air Force launched its first official UFO investigation, Project Sign, to collect and analyze reports. One early incident that really shook investigators happened on January 7, 1948. An experienced Air National Guard pilot, Captain Thomas Mantell, died in a crash while chasing a UFO over Kentucky. Mantell had been pursuing a large metallic object reported at high altitude. He blacked out from lack of oxygen and his plane went down. Project Sign staff privately debated the possibilities. One top-secret estimate in late 1948 allegedly concluded extraterrestrial origins were likely for the most perplexing cases. However, higher-ups in the Pentagon were not ready to leap to that conclusion, and the report was rejected. Project Sign gave way to Project Grudge in 1949, which took a far more skeptical approach. Grudge's public conclusion was that no evidence of alien craft existed, and that UFO reports were due to misidentifications or war nerves, yet the reports kept coming, and some were hard to dismiss. In 1952, UFO sightings exploded in a massive wave around the world, especially in the United States. Pilots, radar operators, and citizens were reporting strange lights and craft almost daily. The summer of 1952 saw perhaps the most dramatic UFO event on U.S. soil. Multiple nights of unknown objects flying over Washington, D.C. In July, radar operators at National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base tracked bright objects zipping near the Capitol. Jet fighters were scrambled, but the objects disappeared, only to return on a later night. These headline-making UFOs over Washington greatly alarmed the Truman administration. The Air Force's ongoing investigation, now rebooted as Project Blue Book, was overwhelmed. Amid public hysteria, the U.S. government convened a panel of scientists in January 1953, sponsored by the CIA, to review the best UFO cases. This Robertson panel, named after physicist H.P. Robertson, concluded that none of the UFO evidence indicated a direct threat or any evidence of alien technology. They did perceive a potential danger in the mass psychology of the UFO craze. They recommended a policy of debunking and demystifying UFO reports through public education, effectively urging the Air Force to tamp down the flying saucer fever to avoid clogging military channels or providing opportunities for enemy disinformation. In short, the Robertson panel suggested it was in the national interest to make UFOs look silly so that citizens would lose interest. This recommendation would color official policy for years. Meanwhile, Project Blue Book, led by Air Force officer Edward Ruppelt and advised by scientist J. Allen Hynek, continued through the 1950s to compile UFO sighting reports. By the time Blue Book ended in 1969, it had cataloged 12,618 sightings, of which 701 remained unidentified even after analysis. A vast majority were explained as stars, clouds, aircraft, or other mundane things. But a core of truly puzzling cases kept the UFO question open. During these years, some remarkably clear UFO photographs also emerged. One classic example is the McMinnville photos from Oregon in 1950, taken by farmer Paul Trent, showing a clear daylight, disc-shaped object flying over his farm. The McMinnville photos were published in Life magazine and studied for decades. Many consider them among the most credible UFO images, though skeptics have also argued they could have been a simple hoax. Regardless, by the mid-1950s, the image of the silver saucer in the sky was firmly etched in the public's imagination, thanks in part to photographs like Trent's and numerous others circulated in the press. By the end of the 1950s, UFOs, or flying saucers, had become a global phenomenon, not just an American curiosity. France had a major UFO flap in 1954, with hundreds of reports, many describing oval or saucer-shaped craft and humanoid occupants. The first big surge of alien being reports. These international cases often mirrored the American ones and showed that whatever the UFO phenomenon was, it wasn't respecting national borders. Government attitudes differed, though. In the UK, the Air Ministry quietly opened a UFO desk in the 1950s to monitor reports, but kept it low profile. It eventually became the job of an officer named Nick Pope in the 1990s, before the UK program was disbanded in 2009. In France, in 1977, the National Space Agency, CNES, even established a formal investigative office called CAPAN to study UFO reports scientifically, one of the few permanent government-supported UFO research programs. Even the Soviet Union had secret studies of the phenomenon during the Cold War. But back to our timeline. As the 1960s dawned, the UFO issue was still very much alive and about to take some new twists. In the 1960s, the UFO scene evolved in two interesting ways. The public sightings continued and even grew in some years, and the official investigations kept trying to find answers or to put the issue to rest. This decade saw some of the most famous individual UFO cases on record, as well as the climax of Project Blue Book. A few notable sightings from the 60s illustrate the range of the phenomenon. In 1961, Betty and Barney Hill in New Hampshire reported not just seeing a UFO, but later recalling an abduction experience, the first widely publicized alien abduction account. In 1964, in the small town of Socorro, New Mexico, police officer Lonnie Zamora witnessed a shiny oval object that landed in the desert, with two small humanoid figures around it. It took off just as he approached.
Zamora's case had physical trace evidence and multiple corroborating witnesses. It remains unexplained and was taken very seriously by Blue Book's investigators. In 1965 to 1967, a wave of UFO sightings across the Midwestern United States led to increased congressional pressure on the Air Force. One incident in Michigan in 1966 resulted in Dr. J. Allen Hynek infamously suggesting a sighting of glowing swamp gas might explain some reports, a statement that caused public ridicule and even a congressional hearing. The pressure was building for an independent scientific review of the UFO evidence. Globally, 1966 saw a mass UFO sighting in Melbourne, Australia, where students and teachers observed a saucer-like object land and take off. Australian officials downplayed it. The cumulative effect of these ongoing reports was that the Air Force wanted out of the UFO business, at least publicly. So in 1966, they contacted the University of Colorado to perform an independent study of UFO sightings, led by physicist Dr. Edward Condon. Over 2 years, the Condon Committee examined cases new and old. In 1968, Dr. Condon's team issued its final report, the Condon Report, which essentially concluded that further study of UFOs was unlikely to be fruitful, that UFOs had not contributed to scientific knowledge, and that there was no evidence of anything beyond the range of known science behind the reports. This gave the Air Force the cover it needed. In 1969, Project Blue Book was formally terminated, ending the Air Force's public investigations. Blue Book's final stats included 701 cases still unexplained, but its conclusion was that none of those unidentifieds showed any sign of being a threat or unknown technology. So by 1970, one might have thought UFOs would fade away, officially consigned to folklore. Indeed, for a few years after Blue Book closed, the subject did go relatively quiet in the US government and the media. However, out of the spotlight, UFO sightings continued worldwide, and civilian research groups took up the mantle of investigation. And the phenomenon was very much alive in the 1970s. It was simply playing out more in the global arena and outside of government channels until governments could no longer ignore it. At this point in our journey, we have to emphasize an interesting paradox. Officially, one could say nothing of significance was found in over 2 decades of US investigations. No saucers in a hangar, no confirmed alien craft. And yet, those same files are filled with cases that make you raise an eyebrow. The public was told there was nothing to see here, but highly credible witnesses, pilots, officers, and radar operators had indeed seen something very real which we simply couldn't explain. Now let's venture abroad and into the 1970s and 80s, where some of the most compelling UFO encounters on record took place, often involving military witnesses and even physical evidence. 1976, Tehran, Iran. In the pre-dawn hours of September 19, 1976, Iranian Air Force commanders were dealing with frantic phone calls about a bright object hovering over Tehran. They scrambled 2 F-4 Phantom II jet interceptors to investigate. What followed was essentially an aerial dogfight with a UFO. As one F-4 closed in, its instrumentation and radio malfunctioned, forcing it to retreat. A second F-4 acquired the object on radar. It appeared as the size of a Boeing 707 tanker on the scope, and the pilot got a visual on a bright, multicolored object. Suddenly, a smaller object detached from the primary UFO and zipped straight toward the jet. The pilot, thinking he was under attack, tried to fire a missile. At that instant, his weapons console went dead, and he lost all communication
he took evasive action. The small object circled back to the main one. This cat and mouse continued until the UFO and its companion objects vanished. Iranian ground radar had tracked some of this, and even witnesses on the ground saw an object low over the city. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, later wrote an incident report highlighting how extraordinary this encounter was, a case where a UFO demonstrated an obvious measure of intelligence by reacting to the F-4. The Tehran incident remains unexplained, with retired Iranian generals still describing it as unlike any conventional aircraft or weapon. Importantly, it's a well-documented military case involving multiple pilots, radar data, and equipment disruption. Exactly the kind of thing that makes even hardened skeptics say, huh, that's interesting. 1977, Colares, Brazil. On a more eerie note, in late 1977, people in a remote Amazon Delta region of Brazil, Colares, reported being attacked by chupas, glowing UFOs that allegedly fired thin beams of light at the ground, causing burns or illness to those caught in them. The panic led the Brazilian Air Force to launch Operation Saucer, an investigation unit that spent months in the jungle interviewing witnesses and staking out for these objects. Dozens of colorful sketches and some photographs were collected, showing typical saucer and cylindrical shapes reported. While much of this case veers into high strangeness, with locals genuinely believing in malevolent forces attacking them, it's notable that a national military took it sufficiently seriously to deploy a team. Some of those Brazilian military reports were declassified decades later, revealing that even the investigators claimed multiple UFO sightings themselves before the operation was ended without clear answers. Brazil's UFO encounters didn't end there. The country has had many famous cases, like the Varginha case in 1996, and to this day, the Brazilian government occasionally releases UFO files publicly. A quick pair of 1978 incidents show the variety of encounters. In Minnesota, Deputy Sheriff Val Johnson's patrol car was struck by a blazing light in August '79. He was knocked out, and when he came to, he had burned retinas, a cracked windshield, and a bent antenna, evidence of a physical encounter with something. Halfway around the world in October 1978, a young pilot named Frederick Valentich disappeared while flying over the Bass Strait in Australia. His last radio transmission described a large object with bright lights hovering and moving around him, and then strange metallic scraping sounds were heard, after which Valentich and his plane were never found.
Delta Sierra Juliet, what type of aircraft is it? That was deleted from the press accounts for some reason. Delta Sierra Juliet, and confirm you cannot identify the aircraft. Delta Sierra Juliet, roger. Stand by. Can you describe the aircraft? Delta Sierra Juliet, roger. how large would the object be? Delta Sierra Juliet. Delta Sierra Juliet. Confirm your aircraft just vanished. Delta Sierra Juliet. Is the aircraft still with you? Delta Sierra Juliet, roger. What are your intentions?
My intentions are to go to King Island, Melbourne, the strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft. Delta Sierra Juliet, Melbourne.
These cases got wide attention and remain unsolved. Felontiches is often thought possibly to be a tragic crash where the UFO was an illusion or misidentification, but it boosted public belief that UFOs might even abduct airplanes. Often dubbed Britain's Roswell, the Rendlesham Forest incident took place over 3 nights in late December 1980, just after Christmas, at a joint U.S. Air Force and Royal Air Force Base complex in Suffolk, England. It's extraordinarily significant because it involved U.S. military personnel as eyewitnesses on foreign soil. On the first night, patrolmen from RAF Woodbridge reported strange lights descending into the forest. One security officer, Sergeant Jim Peniston, ventured in and came upon a small triangular craft landed in a clearing. He later described it as about 3 meters across, with a black, glassy surface covered in strange symbols and emanating bright white light from the underside. After a few minutes, this craft lifted off the ground and zipped away through the trees. The next day, triangular impressions on the ground were found at the site, and readings showed higher than normal radiation in the area. 2 nights later, the lights returned, and this time the deputy base commander, Lieutenant Charles Halt, led a team into the woods. Halt carried a tape recorder, capturing his real-time astonishment as he and others saw a pulsating red light move through the forest and explode into 5 white objects, and witnessed 3 star-like lights maneuvering in the sky, one of which shone a beam of light down near their feet. Halt wrote a memo to the UK Ministry of Defence summarizing these events, a memo that was later released under the UK's declassification of UFO files, lending official credence to the occurrence. Despite the MOD stating the incident posed no defense threat, the Rendlesham case remains one of the best attested close encounters in history, with multiple trained military observers and physical traces. The USAF personnel involved still swear to what they saw. Skeptics have tried to explain it as misidentified lighthouse beams or stars, but those who were there insist it was a structured craft under intelligent control. To this day, if you ask a UFO enthusiast in Britain about top cases, Rendlesham Forest is likely the first they'll cite. Just to note, in 1986, Brazil had a night with 20 UFOs tracked on radar over São Paulo. Jets scrambled. Minister of Defense went on TV, acknowledging something was there. Europe's most famous UFO wave hit Belgium starting in November 1989. Hundreds of citizens, eventually thousands over a year,
reported seeing large triangular craft with bright lights, often moving silently at low altitude. Police officers were among the first witnesses, describing a huge triangle, like a football field, hovering and moving slowly one night. The climax came on the night of March 30th to 31st, 1990, when Belgian Air Force radar picked up unknown targets, and F-16 fighter jets were scrambled to intercept. The F-16 pilots repeatedly locked onto something on radar, only to have the targets accelerate instantaneously from, say, 150 miles per hour to over 1,000 miles per hour, or drop altitude by thousands of feet in a second, maneuvers that would be deadly to a human pilot and impossible for known aircraft. Ground observers, including police, simultaneously saw the triangled craft with their own eyes. What makes the Belgian UFO wave particularly notable is the Belgian government's response. They cooperated with civilian UFO researchers. The Belgian Air Force even worked with SOBEPS, a local UFO group providing radar data. The Belgian Minister of Defense at the time acknowledged the mystery while stopping short of claiming extraterrestrial origin, simply noting that an unknown technology had been observed in Belgian airspace. To this day, no conventional explanation, like stealth bombers or mass hallucination, has fully accounted for the triangles over Belgium. 1994, Rua, Zimbabwe. 62 school children at the aerial school saw a silvery object land near the playground. Beings exited the craft, approached the children, and communicated telepathically about Earth's environmental future. The children gave consistent, detailed accounts and drew nearly identical images. Harvard psychiatrist John Mack investigated and concluded the children were not lying. 1996, Varginha, Brazil. Reports emerged that strange creatures had been captured by the Brazilian military after a UFO crashed in the town of Varginha. Witnesses included firefighters, soldiers, and hospital staff. One soldier reportedly died from contact with one of the beings. Though highly controversial and lacking clear proof, the case has become Brazil's Roswell. 1997, Phoenix, USA. One of the largest mass sighting events in modern times occurred on March 13, 1997, over the state of Arizona, with some reports from neighboring states. Thousands of people witnessed a huge V-shaped or triangular formation of lights travel slowly across the sky, blocking out stars, suggesting a massive craft. Later that night, the military dropped flares over a range as training. Those flares are often conflated with the earlier event. The Phoenix lights were significant in that a sitting state governor, Fife Symington, was a witness, though he initially poked fun at the topic. Years later, he admitted what he saw was otherworldly to him. The case got relatively little national attention at the time, but has since become legendary in UFO circles. It remains unresolved whether there was a giant craft over Phoenix. Skeptics say it was likely airplanes in formation, while witnesses vehemently reject that. In any event, it showed that even in the late 90s, these phenomena could still captivate the public en masse. Through the 80s and 90s, governments slowly and quietly released UFO information. The post-Cold War openness led to revelations like Russia's cosmonauts admitting they'd seen UFOs, or the UK's Ministry of Defense gradually declassifying thousands of UFO reports, which occurred throughout the 2000s. France's aforementioned UFO office, GEPAN, published analyses of cases, including a famous Cometa report in 1999 by French ex-military and scientists, which concluded that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was
a credible explanation for some. This report wasn't an official government white paper, but it was done by establishment figures and sent to the French president, arguing that unknown flying objects of extraterrestrial origin are a real possibility that deserves attention. By 2000, the UFO phenomenon had survived the end of official US investigations and had become somewhat institutionalized in a few other countries and in the civilian realm. A generation of scientists and investigators, like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who founded CUFOS, and Jacques Vallée, and Stanton Friedman, etc., had kept the inquiry alive. Yet there was still great stigma around the topic. Little green men and sci-fi had made UFO believer a fringe label. Serious discussion in mainstream forums was rare. However, this was about to change in the 21st century, when the issue made a surprising comeback into officialdom, this time under the new branding of UAP, and framed as a national security concern. The early 2000s saw a few noteworthy developments that set the stage for what's happening today. One was the continued occurrence of high-caliber sightings, now often captured on modern sensors like video and radar. Another was the quiet interest of a few key individuals in government who would later bring UFOs or UAP back into the spotlight. In 2004, a now famous incident unfolded off the coast of San Diego that would only become public many years later. During training exercises off the coast of Southern California, the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group began detecting strange radar contacts. These unknowns would appear suddenly at 80,000 feet, drop to sea level in less than a second, and hover or move erratically. On November 14th, two FA-18F fighter jets, piloted by Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, were sent to intercept. What they encountered was a smooth, white oblong object about 40 feet long, later dubbed the Tic Tac. The object displayed no visible propulsion, wings, or rotors. It mirrored Fravor's movements before accelerating out of sight at unimaginable speed. Another crew later captured it on forward-looking infrared video. These videos, along with two others, Gimbal and Go Fast, from 2015, would eventually be declassified and published, sparking the modern UAP debate. The Nimitz encounter in particular became the gold standard for military UAP cases. Multiple witnesses, multiple sensors, and performance beyond known human technology. The incident also involved radar tracking from the USS Princeton and E-2 Hawkeye aircraft, underwater sonar data, and corroborating visual reports from multiple fighter pilots, making it one of the most heavily corroborated military encounters on record. What most people didn't know at the time was that behind the scenes, the Pentagon had already launched a secretive effort to investigate UAP. In 2007, at the request of Senator Harry Reid, with the support of Senators Daniel Inouye and Ted Stevens, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was formed. With $22 million in funding, the Pentagon contracted Robert Bigelow's company, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, to study phenomena associated with UFOs. This included materials recovery, health effects, anomalous physics, and even alleged crash retrieval reports. Bigelow outfitted secure facilities to store materials said to exhibit unusual isotopic ratios and structural properties. Some of this research took place at Skinwalker Ranch, a property known for its concentration of anomalous activity. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence supporting the extraterrestrial hypothesis doesn't come from eyewitnesses or radar data. It comes from what appears to be direct insider knowledge of material recovery. In 2020, Dr. Eric Davis, a physicist who worked as a subcontractor for the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Applications Program, briefed members of the U.S. Defense Department and congressional staffers about what he described as off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. His credibility, coupled with the context of a classified briefing, sent ripples through the defense and scientific communities. The U.S. Army, in collaboration with To the Stars Academy, also entered into a cooperative research and development agreement to study novel materials with potential defense applications. Some of these materials were claimed to be fragments from UAP encounters and allegedly demonstrated metamaterial properties such as wave guiding at terahertz frequencies, memory metal characteristics, and energy responses not found in Earth-based substances. These programs hint at something extraordinary, not just sightings or encounters, but physical evidence, recovered technology. If these claims are even partially true, they support the notion that we're not just observing advanced craft in our skies. We may have already touched them. The existence of crash retrieval programs, the classified handling of exotic materials, and multiple whistleblowers suggesting the same narrative form a constellation of evidence. And taken, they suggest that the extraterrestrial hypothesis isn't just plausible, it may already be an open secret. Luis Elizondo, a career military intelligence officer with experience in counterintelligence and special access programs, took over the ATIP portfolio within the Department of Defense. He later became a central figure in the push for public disclosure. Elizondo claimed he encountered resistance and apathy within the Department of Defense, even as credible reports from Navy pilots and other personnel piled up. He eventually resigned in protest in 2017, stating that the phenomenon was real, persistent, and potentially threatening, and that leadership was failing to act. In December 2017, the New York Times published a bombshell story by Helene Cooper, Leslie Kean, and Ralph Blumenthal revealing ATIP's existence. It included the now famous Tic Tac, gimbal, and Go Fast videos. The article also revealed that the US government had been actively funding research into materials analysis and biological effects allegedly linked to UAP encounters. The story reignited the public's interest in UFOs, or UAP, as they were now increasingly called in official documents. From 2018 onward, the narrative began to shift. The US Navy confirmed the video's authenticity in 2019. In 2020, a Senate committee chaired by Marco Rubio requested an unclassified report on UAP activity. In June 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released that report. Out of 144 military encounters with UAP from 2004 to 2021, 143 remained unexplained. The report stated that some objects appeared to demonstrate advanced technology, including sudden acceleration, the ability to remain stationary in high winds, and transmedium travel, movement between air and water without loss of performance. While the report did not confirm extraterrestrial origin, it also did not rule it out. Still, the report made headlines. More importantly, it marked the first time in decades that the US government admitted it was actively investigating a phenomenon that it had once publicly dismissed. The military had created a new office, first the UAP Task Force, then rebranded as
ARROW,
the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, to investigate.
ARROW
Was given expanded authority to collect reports from across the Department of Defense and intelligence community, and was tasked with establishing procedures to study crash retrievals and exotic materials, if any existed. by 2022, NASA had also entered the conversation. A panel of scientists was convened to study UAP from a purely scientific perspective. The panel, led by astrophysicist David Spergel, emphasized the importance of collecting better sensor data and removing stigma from the field of study. And Congress continued passing legislation to support whistleblowers who might have information about crash retrieval or reverse engineering programs. These measures suggested that lawmakers had been briefed on classified information, pointing to the existence of legacy programs operating outside conventional oversight. Government reports themselves confirm UFOs with seemingly unearthly capabilities. In early 2023, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, released a report documenting 171 UAP incidents that remain unresolved, and notably, some of these appear to have demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities beyond known tech. Think about that. The US intelligence community is tacitly acknowledging craft in our skies doing things we cannot replicate, even after careful analysis. This isn't fringe hearsay. It's in a formal report to Congress, effectively saying, we have sensor data of impossible maneuvers. High-level officials openly discuss these baffling capabilities. For example, former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe revealed that UAP reports include objects engaging in actions that are difficult to explain, movements that are hard to replicate, that we don't have the technology for, including flying at supersonic speeds without sonic booms. When you have a recent DNI essentially confirming performance beyond the laws of physics as we know them, it strongly hints at non-human origin or technology far ahead of our own. Emphasizing such official statements and reports will bolster the case that some UAP encounters defy prosaic explanation. In fact, they line up with what we'd expect from an advanced intelligence's craft, rather than any state on Earth. In July 2023,
Retired intelligence officer David Crush
testified under oath to Congress, alleging that the U.S. possesses retrieved craft of non-human origin, along with biological specimens.
Grush,
who had served as the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's representative to the UAP task force, claimed he was informed of these programs by dozens of credible witnesses and had turned over hundreds of pages of evidence. He stated that these programs were hidden under misappropriated budget lines and kept from oversight by intentional obfuscation.
Crush's claims,
while not yet verified with hard evidence, were supported by others in government and military circles. Commander David Fravor and former Navy pilot Ryan Graves also testified, stating that encounters with these craft were ongoing and dangerous, that they posed a threat to air safety and national security, and that some were observed on a daily basis during training missions. They argued that pilots were discouraged from reporting, which created unnecessary risk. At the same time, respected academics entered the fray. Dr. Gary Nolan, a Stanford immunologist, stated publicly that he was 100% certain that we are being visited by non-human intelligence. Nolan cited studies of biological effects on witnesses, isotopic analysis of alleged recovered materials, and consistent patterns in reports suggesting intelligence and intent. He has analyzed alleged UAP debris with cutting-edge instruments. In one well-documented instance, metal fragments from a 1950s Brazilian UFO event were put under nanosims mass spectrometry. Nolan found the sample had magnesium isotope ratios that were wildly skewed, up to 30% different from any natural magnesium found on Earth. For perspective, Our industrial processes don't produce such isotope deviations in stable elements. There's no mundane reason or method to create magnesium with exotic isotope ratios in the manner observed. Nolan stated plainly that if you find a stable metal with isotopes that far off normal, it means that material has likely been engineered by some process unknown to us. In short, it wasn't formed in Earth's natural environment, or even in any known lab.
This isn't the only case of weird metals. There are accounts of memory metals from Roswell, anecdotally, and bismuth magnesium layers from crash sites that scientists still can't fully explain. But sticking to verified analysis, Nolan's work and similar studies by Dr. Jacques Vallée provides hard data suggesting some UAP debris is truly anomalous in composition. We can cite Nolan's Vice interview, where he discusses the magnesium fragment. One piece had normal isotopes, the other from the same site was inexplicably different. This rules out machine error or lab mix-up. The implication is that whoever built that material had isotopic engineering capabilities beyond current human tech, exactly what you'd expect if it were from an extraterrestrial civilization. I think I might have gone on a little too long about that. Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, helped coordinate congressional briefings and has published multiple essays arguing that at least some UAP exhibit characteristics beyond known technology. Avi Loeb, Harvard astrophysicist and head of the Galileo Project, led an expedition to retrieve metallic fragments from the ocean floor off Papua New Guinea, believed to be remnants of IM-1, the first interstellar meteor confirmed by U.S. Space Command. His team is analyzing these particles for signs of artificial origin. Loeb has also advocated for creating an academic infrastructure to study UAP systematically, with full transparency and peer review. All of these developments,
from Elizondo to Grush,
from Pentagon briefings to academic investigations, have redefined the public's relationship with the phenomenon. UAP are now on the record. They are in congressional hearings, on sensor systems, and in national security discussions. While the extraterrestrial hypothesis is still only one possibility, the facts are these unknown craft with extraordinary capabilities have been observed, measured, and verified by our most sophisticated instruments and credible personnel. We don't yet know what they are, but we can no longer pretend they're not there. Looking at all of this, from ancient texts and religious experiences to radar contacts, government programs, and whistleblower testimony, a pattern starts to emerge, not just of sightings, but of perception, a shift in how humanity confronts the unknown. For centuries, anomalous events were interpreted through religious or mythic lenses. Now we've replaced gods with galaxies, omens with sensors, but the mystery remains. Whether you believe these phenomena are extraterrestrial, interdimensional, man-made, or psychological, the core truth is something is happening. This is not the product of a single nation, era, or worldview. UAP sightings are global, consistent, and often involve physical effects, whether it's electromagnetic interference, radiation burns, or the physical impression of landing gear. Reports come from people with everything to lose: commercial pilots, military commanders, radar techs, and even scientists. These are individuals trained to observe and report with clarity, not fantasy. These are not YouTube theorists. They are credentialed professionals with decades of experience, willing to risk their careers for what they believe the evidence shows. Growing legitimacy of the subject can also be seen in political circles. In addition to Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Marco Rubio, and Representatives Tim Burchett
and Anna Paulina Luna, other officials have added their voices. Representative Mike Gallagher has suggested the UAP issue could involve recovered technology and has pushed for transparency around potential crash retrieval programs. Congressman Andre Carson
led a public congressional hearing
insisting on the importance of national security. Senator Chuck Schumer introduced legislation calling for UAP-related records to be declassified and preserved. Representative Jared Moskowitz has consistently spoken in favor of whistleblower protections and deeper oversight. Many of these officials from both parties are acting on classified briefings and insider testimony. Let's zoom out for a second. We live in a time where satellites can track a mosquito from orbit. And yet, when it comes to this one subject, this persistent, bizarre, globally observed subject, we're told to shrug and move on. Why? Why is this the only area of defense and science where a shrug is considered an answer? The truth is, we're in a transitional moment. The stigma is crumbling. The mechanisms of secrecy are being challenged, not just by public curiosity, but by lawmakers, academics, and even former presidents. Barack Obama has said, "There are objects in our skies we can't explain." Bill Clinton has expressed regret at how little he was able to find. Donald Trump has admitted he was briefed on very interesting things he couldn't discuss. And if there's even a sliver of a chance that some of these objects are not ours, not Russian, not Chinese, but something else, then that changes everything. That means humanity may not be alone. That means physics, biology, and consciousness itself might have layers we're only beginning to sense. And that's the point. This isn't about proving aliens exist. It's about waking up to the fact that reality might be more complex and more populated than we've been taught.